All right, in this final video on our series on solving equations, we're going to put kind of a lot of things together. So this is probably the hardest type of equation that you'll see, or most complicated, maybe not hardest, but it does have a lot of things that you have to do in order to solve. So this is distributive property and variables on both sides of the equation. So if you have distributive property, you must distribute first, and you must distribute as many times as you need to. So, for example, if I'm doing, if I see I have distributive property here, I'm going to distribute the 4 to the 2a plus 3. So why don't we do that right now? So 4 times 2a is 8a, and 4 times 3 is 12. All right, now I have to distribute again, because I see right here I have distributive property. So I'm going to take care of this distributive property by multiplying negative 3 times a is negative 3a, and negative 3 times, make sure you know this is negative 1, is positive 3. So I have a negative times a negative situation. And then don't forget, you still have a plus 31. All right, so that's what I mean, distribute as many times as needed. Next thing I need to do, combine like terms on each side of the equation. So now I have to look at the left side of the equation, and I have the expression 8a plus 12. Well, those are not like terms, so there's nothing to combine here. So I go to the right side of the equation, negative 3a plus 3 plus 31. Well, 3 and 31 are both constants, so I must combine those constants by doing addition. So 8a plus 12 equals negative 3a, and 3 plus 31 is 34. Okay, so now we've simplified the left side of our equation and the right side of our equation. And let me see if I can get this to focus a little bit better. All right, so now part 3 of this is we are going to do our problem solving process. So add the opposites of terms with variables on both sides of the equation. So let's see what that looks like. And this is probably the hardest thing to do. There it goes, it finally focused. So once we distribute and combine like terms, basically what we have to do is get our variables all on either the left side of the equation or the right side of the equation. And what I like to do is, okay, I look at the left, I've got 8a, and if I look at the right, I've got negative 3a. I want to cancel out this negative 3a. And the way I do that is by adding the opposite of negative 3a. And that will give me negative 3a plus 3a is 0a's, which is really just 0. So that's why I use addition and subtraction in this case. Now I have to add the same amount to the left side, which is 3a. And then I'm going to combine these like terms. 8a plus 3a is 11a. And 11a plus 12 equals, now I'm just left with 34. And what do you know? We have a two-step equation. So I'm going to go through my two-step equation process. This is two-step equation right here, 4, 5, and 6. Add the opposite of the constants. Well, my constant is 12. The opposite of my constant is negative 12. I'm going to add that to both sides. 12 minus 12 is just 0, so I'm left with 11a. 34 minus 12, well, that's 22. And the last one, multiply and divide by the coefficients. Well, my coefficient's 11, so I'm going to divide by 11 on both sides, and I get this nice answer of a equals 2. Now, very last thing, don't forget to check. I'm going to go back to the original equation and plug in 2 everywhere I see a. So 4 times the quantity 2 times 2 plus 3 equals, and we want to know, does that equal negative 3 times 2 minus 1 plus 31? So let's look at the left side and see if we can simplify that first. I have parentheses, and in my parentheses I have multiplication, so I'm going to multiply. 4, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 3. I'm going to keep going on the left side. 4 plus 3 is 7, so I have 4 times 7. I end up with 28 on the left side. Now, do we get 28 on the right side is also? Well, let's go through and simplify. I'm going to do parentheses first. 2 minus 1. Well, 2 minus 1 is 1. So we get negative 3 times 1 plus 31. All right. Well, if I multiply negative 3 plus 31, that is negative 3. And negative 3 plus 31, does that equal 28? And it does. So I get 28 on the left, 28 on the right, which means A equals 2 is my correct solution. Let's look at another one. Okay, now this one has variables on both sides. However, we do not have to do any distributive properties, so we're going to skip that first step. We don't need to distribute. I just need to get all of my variables on one side of the equation. So I've got 6x's on the left, 5x's on the right. I'm going to cancel out the 5x's by adding negative 5x's to both sides. And the reason why I do that is if I add negative 5x to both sides, then I won't have to deal with having a negative amount of x's. So 5x minus 5x is 0x. That means it cancels. 6x minus 5x is 1x, but we're not going to write the 1 as the coefficient. It's just x. We still have that plus 5 equals 10. All right, and now we've just got a one-step equation. I need to add the opposite of 5, which is my constant, to both sides. So I'm going to add negative 5 to both sides. This cancels. 5 minus 5 is 0. X equals 5, and since the coefficient is already 1x, we've solved at this point. Now let's check and make sure that this is correct by plugging in 5 in the original equation everywhere I see an x. So there's an x there. Equals 10 plus 5 times 5. And let's go ahead and simplify both sides of the equation. I'm going to multiply first. 6 times 5 is 30. And does that equal 10, and then 5 plus 5 is 25, and it looks like it's going to work out because 30 plus 5 is 35, and 10 plus 25 is also 35, so that tells me this is the correct solution. Same thing on number 2. I don't have to distribute, but if you notice, okay, I've got negative 20y plus 15 equals 2 minus 16y plus 11. On that right side of my equation, I've got some like terms I need to combine. I've got a 2 and an 11. So I'm going to add those together before I do anything else. So negative 20y plus 15 equals, so I'm going to have negative 16y, and 2 plus 11 is 13. All right, now I'm going to add the opposite of one of the terms on one of the sides with the variable. So I'm going to ask myself, do I want to add the opposite of negative 20y to both sides, or do I want to add the opposite of negative 16y to both sides? And I'm actually going to pick negative 20y, because that way I'll have a positive amount of y's. Add the 20y to both sides. This becomes 0y, which cancels. So I'm left with 15 equals negative 16y plus 20y is 4y plus 13. Now I've got a two-step equation. On the right side of my equation, I'm going to add the opposite of the constant 13 to both sides, which is negative 13. That cancels. 15 minus 13 is 2. And 2 equals 4y. Now, last thing, multiply or divide by the coefficient. I'm going to divide by the coefficient 4 on both sides. And I'm not going to turn that into a decimal. I'm actually going to leave it as a fraction, but I am going to simplify 2/4 to 1/2. All right, so let's check and see if 1/2 is the correct solution to our equation. So back to the original equation, I'm going to plug in 1/2 everywhere I see a y. So plus 15 equals 2 minus 16. I'm going to plug in 1/2 for that y, plus 11. All right, let's evaluate the left side. I'm going to multiply first. Negative 20 times 1/2 is negative 10. And negative 10 plus 15 is 5. And does that equal, well, we're going to multiply first here as well. Negative 16 times 1/2 is negative 8. So 2 minus 8 plus 11. And I want to know, does this equal 5? So 2 minus 8 is negative 6, and then plus 11. Yeah, and we do end up with the correct thing because 5 does equal 5. So that means 1/2 is the correct answer for y. 2 more. I know this video is getting kind of long. I apologize, but these are very involved problems with lots of steps to them. Okay, so negative 8 times the quantity negative 8x minus 6 equals negative 6x minus 22. I've got distributive property, so I'm going to distribute that negative 8. So negative 8 times negative 8x is 64x. Negative 8, this is also negative. Negative 6 is positive 48. Got negative times negative situation. Nothing to distribute on the right side of the equation, so I've got negative 6x minus 22. All right, so I got to decide, do I want to add the opposite of negative 6, or do I want to add the opposite of negative 64? And hopefully you're seeing, like, I definitely want to add the opposite of negative 6, which is positive 6 to both sides, because that way I will end up with a positive amount of x's. So that equals negative 22. So I end up with this canceling. 70x plus 48 equals negative 22. I've got this constant 48. I'm going to add the opposite of 48, which is negative 48 to both sides. This cancels. 70x equals, all right, 22 and 48 combined, and they're both negative, so the answer is going to be negative. That is going to be 70. And if I divide by the coefficient 70 on both sides, I get x equals negative 1. Last thing we're going to do, of course, check our solution. So it's going to be a little cramped, but I think we can manage. I'll start it down here, and then we'll continue up on the side over here. Everywhere I see an x, I'm going to plug in negative 1. So negative 8 times negative 1 minus 6. Negative 6 times negative 1 minus 22. All right, start on the left side. I've got parentheses, and inside parentheses I've got multiplication. Negative 8 times negative 1 is positive 8. I got positive 8 minus 6. And let's see, I could do some simplifying over on the right side. Negative 6 times negative 1 is positive 6 minus 22. All right, let's take this, continue this up here. So on the left side, 8 minus 6 is 2. So we've got negative 8 times 2. Does that equal 6 minus 22? Well, that's a negative 16, and negative 8 times negative 2 is negative 16, so it works. So that is the correct solution. All right, very last problem. 8 times the quantity 1 plus 5x plus 5 equals 13 plus 5x. I've got distributive property. Got to distribute this 8 first, so let's go ahead and do that. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times 5x is 40x, and don't forget this plus 5. Nothing to distribute over here. I've got 13 plus 5x. All right, I do have some like terms of 8 and 5, so I'm going to combine those together. Let's see, 13 plus 40x equals 13 plus 5x. Now, let's get the x's all on one side. I can either add negative 40x to both sides or add negative 5x to both sides. I'm going to go ahead and add negative 5x. That cancels on the right. 13 plus 35x equals 13. I'm going to subtract, or I'm going to add the opposite of 13 to both sides to cancel this. 35x. Now you might be going, oh my gosh, this cancels. Well, 13 minus 13 is equal to 0, which means when I divide by my coefficient 35 on both sides, I get x equals 0. Is that okay? Yeah, we talked about this in an earlier video. If you get an answer of my variable equals 0, that's fine. It's okay. You're allowed to have x equals 0, but let's just check really quick and make sure that this works by plugging in 0 every time we see x. And then let's go through. So on the left side, I've got 5 times 0. Well, that's 0. And 1 plus 0 is 1. So I've got 8 times 1 plus 5 equals, on the right side, I've got 5 times 0, which is 0, equals 13. And I ran out of room, so we'll do this right here. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 5, does that equal 13? And yes, it does. So that tells me that the value of x is indeed 0.